The sound of my apartment door clicking could be heard down the hall. I took off my shoes, tired from a long day at work. I had been excited all day to see Laura, especially since she had just finished from college. I thought we could celebrate together, but as soon as I walked into our living room, the joy in my chest turned into a heavy feeling in my stomach. The room was dark, the blinds were closed, and there was a faint smell of alcohol in the air. As I looked at what I saw, my heart was beating fast. The 3 years I've known Laura, she was lying on the couch, her graduation dress strewn out on the floor next to her. She looked messy, and her eyes were half closed. But it wasn't Laura's condition that made my blood run cold. It was seeing Jake and Shelly, 2 of our friends, leaning in close to her and putting their faces right next to hers. It was hard to hear them laugh, but the way they were hovering over Laura was disturbing. My senses took over, and I walked up to them with my voice shaking. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked, my eyes getting narrow. Jake jumped back, and his phone fell to the floor following him. Her makeup was all over the place as Shelly pulled away from Laura. She looked at me with a mix of surprise and guilt in her eyes. Jake tried to sound relaxed as he said, "Liam, we were just messing around." When I found out what they were doing, I got very angry. Jake had his phone rolling and was recording the whole thing. Shelly was making out with Laura while she was clearly not ready to agree. "You call this messing around?" My voice rose as I screamed. Jake's phone was on the floor, and I grabbed it and deleted the movies and pictures. My hands were shaking with anger. "This is sick." Jake and Shelly looked at each other with eyes that showed a hint of guilt. It looked like they knew their reasons weren't going to work. As I turned away from them, I looked at Laura instead. I gently shook her shoulder to try to wake her up from her sleepiness caused by the alcohol. Her eyelids flapped open as she let out a soft grunt. "Liam," she mumbled, but her voice was weak. I got down on my knees next to her, my anger still building. "Laura, are you all right? Do you remember what took place?" Her memory was clearly fuzzy as she blinked at me. I had a few drinks with Jake and Shelly, and then I gently cut her off because I didn't want to stress her out. "Yes, Laura, it's okay. Now you're safe. I'm right here." As she tried to sit up, she winced. By the look in her eyes, I could tell she was upset because she had been lied to. When I looked back at Jake and Shelly, my voice was cold and firm. "You two need to leave now." I told them in a way that left no room for debate. "And we're going to have a serious conversation about this." Jake and Shelly gave each other one last awkward look before running out the door quickly. What I saw them leave made me sad because I knew that this was just the start of a long and painful road for Laura and me. When Jake and Shelly left, Laura and I were left in the living room by ourselves. She was sitting on the couch with her graduation dress rumpled next to her. Her eyes were still cloudy from being so confused. When we started to talk about what had happened, I couldn't help but feel angry and need to protect her. "Liam, what did they do to me?" Laura asked with a shaking voice. There was no doubt that she was trying to put together the pieces of her memories of the night. I sat down next to her and took her hand. "Laura, they went too far. It's not okay that they took advantage of you when you were weak." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "They had my trust, Liam. I believed they were my friends." I gave her a comforting squeeze on the hand. "I know, and that's what makes this even more unforgivable." Laura's phone rang with a text message while we talked. It made her face twist with anger as she picked it up and read the message. It was Jake, and the message didn't sound sorry at all. She read out loud, her voice full of shock. "Laura, you're blowing this out of proportion. The person who asked us to record it was you. We were just having fun, so don't blame us." I clenched my hands because I was so angry. "Mary, that's not true. They want to blame you for what happened." When Laura's phone rang again, it was another text message from Shelly. She read it out loud, upset and angry, and her voice shook. "You know what, Laura? You're always breaking the rules. You might not have caused this if you weren't so cold." It was hard for me to believe what I was hearing. Jake and Shelly were not only trying to explain what they did, but they were also putting the blame on Laura for everything. It was a disgusting attempt to trick her and get out of being responsible. "Laura, they're trying to trick you," I told her in a strong voice. "Don't let them get away with this." Laura wiped away a tear and nodded. She was becoming more determined. "No, Liam. I won't. They will have to pay for what they did." As the night went on, we stopped Jake and Shelly's calls because we didn't want to talk to them anymore. We knew it had to be done to protect ourselves and get justice for Laura, even though it hurt and was hard to make. The battle was about to start, and we were ready to face it together. The harassing and gaslighting by Jake and Shelly got worse in the days after the upsetting event. Their goal seemed to be to make Laura's life a daily hell. They sent her a lot of mean texts, calls, and social media messages, and each one was worse than the last. "Laura, you're being too dramatic. It was just a joke," Jake wrote in one reply. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" Shelly added another one. Laura got tired of getting texts all the time, and she started to doubt herself. It seemed like Jake and Shelly were trying to lower her self-esteem by making her doubt her feelings and the gravity of what had happened. I got another text from Shelly one night while we were sitting in the living room. As she read the words out loud, her face turned pale. "Laura, you were always too tense. You might not have caused this if you weren't so cold." When Laura looked at me, I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "Liam, they're trying to make me believe I brought this on myself." I put a light squeeze on her hand. "They're not right, Laura. It's not your fault, and they will not get away with it." Jake and Shelly didn't want to just text each other, though. They began telling our friends fake things about Laura and me, which turned them against us. They told Laura she was making a big deal out of nothing and that she was even trying to use the situation to get attention. It was tense when we met up with a group of friends at a nearby cafe one evening. Even though Jake and Shelly weren't there, their mean words had already reached our friends. Sarah, one of them, talked to Laura. Sarah said in an angry tone, "I heard you were making things worse than they were. Is that true?" Laura tried hard not to cry as she said, "No, Sarah, it's not true." Her voice was shaking. "I'm just trying to stand up for myself because they used me." But Sarah was still doubtful, which was similar to the worries Jake and Shelly had given her. "Plain, I don't know. It looks like you're making a big deal out of nothing." We left the cafe with heavy hearts because it felt like a deception. Laura's mental and emotional health was suffering because Jake and Shelly were making her feel bad all the time, and it seemed like she couldn't get away from their harmful influence. Our nightmare was getting worse, and we knew we had to do something about it. As Jake and Shelly continued to bother Laura and gaslight her, it became clear that we had to go to court to protect her and hold her attackers responsible. There was a lawyer we met who specialized in harassment and assault cases. He told us we had a good case. At first, Laura wasn't sure if she should do it because she was afraid of the court process and the possible backlash, but she knew it was the right thing to do. We chose to file a police report with the help of our lawyer. It was tense the day we went to the police station. As we walked into the building, Laura held on tight to my hand. I could see fear in her eyes. A cop who seemed to care about us told us that they would look into our case. The officer told us that there was enough proof to press charges against Jake and Shelly after we gave our statements and the evidence we had. In some cases, they might even take their phones as proof in the case. It was a small win, but it was something that changed everything. Jake and Shelly thought they could get away with what they did, but now they will have to deal with the rest of their lives. The court case had started, and Laura was determined to see it through to the end. But as we took this step, Jake and Shelly's behavior got worse. They looked like they were dying to get back in charge of Laura and the situation. They started leaving unwanted presents and disturbing notes on our door, which made us feel even more scared and anxious. The next night, when we got home from treatment, there was a bouquet of flowers on our door. There was a note on them that made my blood run cold. Reading, "We'll always be watching." The note made Laura's hands shake, and she looked at me with a scared and angry look on her face. "Stop it, Liam. They can't keep setting us off in this way." I nodded, and my resolve matched hers. Laura, we'll write down everything. We are going to let the cops know about these new events. Not only that, but Jake and Shelly took their bullying to a whole new level by calling Laura's parents. They reached out to them, making themselves look like the victims and Laura look like the one who started it all. Laura's parents started to question what their daughter was doing because they didn't know the truth. When Laura's mother called, it made her cry. Lisa, why are you treating Jake and Shelly this way? You've always had a good relationship with them. It broke Laura's heart, and she felt like she was losing the support of her own family. Though she was scared, she knew she had to keep fighting for justice, not just for herself but for all the harassed and abused women who were not heard enough. The court process had started once the police report was turned in, and the evidence was in their hands. Laura and I had to figure out how to get through the complicated world of law enforcement, judges, and the search for justice. The police officer who was in charge of Laura's case was kind and worked hard. He promised that they were not going to let this go, and that they were actively looking for Jake and Shelly. They had already questioned both of them, and it looked like the walls were closing in on the people who were attacking her. Once, after getting some new information from the cops, Laura and I sat down in our living room, feeling both relieved and scared. It looks like the police are set on catching Jake and Shelly, I told Laura to reassure her. There was a hint of worry in her eyes as she nodded. I just hope they can gather enough evidence to make sure they're held accountable. We also got help and advice from our lawyer, who explained the formal process and told us what to expect in the coming months. He told us that the removed files from Jake's phone and Laura's witness statement were strong signs of wrongdoing. During the court cases, Laura started going to therapy to help her deal with the mental and emotional pain she had been through. The therapist, Dr. Evans, was kind, skilled, and specialized in helping people heal from trauma. Laura's therapist, Dr. Evans, told her to talk about her feelings and fears during one of their meetings. I can't stop blaming myself, Dr. Evans, Laura told him one day, her voice shaking. I keep thinking that I should have been more careful, that I should have seen this coming. Dr. Evans leaned in closer, and her face showed that she was kind and understanding. Laura, don't forget that what happened wasn't your fault. There's no reason not to feel bad about how you were treated. But they aren't based in truth. Laura said yes, but tears were running down her face. I just want to heal from this, to put it behind me. Laura started to feel strong and believe in herself again as the therapy meetings went on. She felt guilty and blamed herself, but Dr. Evans helped her get over it and gave her the tools to deal with the emotional scars the attack had left. Even though the court case and therapy meetings were hard, they were important steps in Laura's healing process. She was no longer fighting Jake and Shelly by herself. With the help of the cops and Dr. Evans, she was able to face her fears and fight for what was right. Our lives slowly started to get back to normal as the court process went on, and Laura made progress in therapy. Something had calmed down with Jake and Shelly, and we had taken steps to keep ourselves safe and our privacy. But the mental scars and problems caused by the event were still there. Laura was determined to get justice no matter what. Jake and Shelly were charged by the police because they had enough proof to do so. The thought of going to court weighed heavily on their minds. One night, our lawyer, Daniel, called to let us know what was going on with the case. The phone was on speaker so both of us could hear. Good news, Daniel said with happiness in his voice. The charges against Jake and Shelly are moving forward, the DA said. We're going to court soon. It felt good to breathe out, and Laura smiled a little. Thanks, Daniel. We care a lot about this. We knew the road ahead would still be hard when we hung up the phone. But we were glad that we were making progress and holding Jake and Shelly responsible for what they did. She had also been deeply affected by Laura's treatment. She had learned how to deal with the pain and guilt, and over time, her self-esteem began to rise again. Laura and I sat down in a nearby park one day after treatment to talk about how far she had come. When she looked at me, her eyes were full of thanks. She spoke with tears in her eyes and said, Liam, I couldn't have done this without your unwavering support. Thank you for standing by me. I took her hand in mine and squeezed it to make her feel better. I love you, Laura, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what. Our relationship had been put to the test, and through it, it had grown stronger. We had been through the worst times together, and we were determined to get through this together. Laura was determined to use her experience to help other people, even though the court case was still going on. She started going to support groups for people who had been raped or harassed. These groups gave her a shoulder to lean on and a voice of understanding. As we sat at the kitchen table one night, Laura told me what she thought about the support group. Liam, I want to use my story to make a difference, to let other survivors know they're not alone. I smiled, proud of how strong she was. That's an incredible way to turn a painful experience into something positive, Laura. Our journey wasn't over yet, but we were stronger than ever as a team and going forward. Laura's strength and determination showed how important it is to stand up against unfairness and how powerful resilience can be.